everyone fights, no one quits.
Welcome to the WTC Squadcast, your place for a global perspective on competitive 40k and the team tournament meta, as well as the latest updates regarding the World Team Championships. On this week's episode, we are joined by Innes from Team Scotland, James from Team England, and Vili from Team Finland to have a discussion on their first impressions of 9th edition 40k and how it may impact the meta. But before that section, myself, Tom, and Isik would like to discuss how 9th edition has been affecting the WTC and our decisions as tournament organisers. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Hi.
And obviously, hi from me again. So, obviously, 9th edition has finally dropped. Everything's changed. New rules, new terrain, new missions, new everything. So, obviously, there's a lot of challenges for us. There'll be a lot of impacts on how the WTC is going to work going ahead. And these are things we have to obviously work on quickly because a lot of teams are expecting, new rules and everything updates from us as soon as possible. So I thought just to start with the big one would be the terrain. Obviously, WTC is famous for its terrain. Isik, you produce it. And we recently released some terrain maps to sort of like our proposal how we can maybe do terrain for WTC going forward. Isik, Tom, you guys worked on this more than I did. Do you want to go through sort of the thought processes and the challenges involved?
Sure. Our initial thought was if we can just accomplish everything we wanted with just one map, and we quickly realized that it was impossible because with 8 players and 8 missions, it was really hard to create just one map. So it branched into initially 4 maps, then 8 maps, then each mission had different maps. It sort of like got really complicated really fast. Our initial idea was to create maps that are varied with some themes in it, like forests, factories, or essentially ruined cityscapes. So there will be at least visually appealing as well. On top of that, to create both firing lanes, at least to complement shooting armies in some regard, while still giving out protection to armies that didn't rely on shooting, at least in their deployment zone, and to give them a pathway to approach the enemy at least.
Yeah, so in 9th, everything changes with the mission. So I think that the most important factor in our fiddling around with terrain is the placement of the objectives. They're so widespread over all the missions that getting like one set of terrain to go with all the missions is practically impossible. So I think at this point we're thinking maybe of resetting the terrain for each day of the WTC. Then we can maybe have some maps that are a bit more balanced, I would say, for the 3 games that are played each day, or the 2 for the last day, instead of trying to fit one terrain layout for the 8 different missions, which is almost impossible to do.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you obviously try to create multiple maps, they're going to be switched up to day by day. Isn't that also going to put more demands on having more terrain? And obviously, logistics are going to bring even more terrain to an event like the WTC.
No, I would just keep the same terrain per table, but just reshuffle the position. So just to make it more workable for the specific mission or deployment type or whatnot.
We also have the option of taking some pieces from one table and move it to the other table, but like keeping the total amount of terrain the same in a row, so players can just take a small ruin from table 2, take it to table 5. We'll of course have the map.
I wouldn't do that. It would be too complex, I think. I think we need to keep this very, very simple.
Yeah, as the head referee, I want to keep this simple.
Yeah, exactly.
So I won't have the crazy idea. So
for now, we have one map for all the 8 different missions. So we have 8 tables, and each table has a set terrain type for all the different missions. So regardless of deployment type changing, the terrain is in the exact same position for all the deployment types. But we can maybe decide to change that later. Right now, the captains have like a sort of a thread to go by to see if they like what we have proposed or not, and where we have to change things.
People seem to like the aspect that every table is different. But we are at the moment thinking like all the feedback I got was more about the terrains in the specific terrain pieces, like make it smaller, make it bigger, move it. But I think Tom, you got more detailed feedback about where to place them.
Not really, just here and there people complaining about the fact that we made the forest obscuring, or that we use a lot of containers, which of course people that have bought your sets in the past don't have yet. So it's more and more like that. Like we said, everything is new, everything has changed. So I think just everybody needs to get around to that. I mean, for us as well, we need to make a lot of forests that we didn't have before. We're gonna put lots of containers on the table. So also for us, we need to make that happen for the next summer.
I mean, what's influenced? I mean, like I said, you guys are much more involved in the trade than I was. I was busy, obviously, being a dad, with Dylan being born at the start of the summer. I mean, obviously we haven't really bothered with forests previously, or even like these containers. Containers, especially, were very common in the ITC setup. Like LVO and LGT use a lot of them. What sort of influenced you guys in the same way you need to start using containers at WTC?
The containers were we looked into the terrain options we had, and it was either all ruins, and that got boring really fast actually. And we don't have really like the hills don't do much anymore, like because the ramped hills they don't really provide a good gaming experience. So it was more like containers can be both used for line of sight blocking, which is needed really in this edition more than 8, I personally think. And on top of that, it allowed for placement of units that can shoot or move across. The small obstacles we had in the previous editions, like the tall tin walls, didn't allow unit placement on top of them. So this is an upgrade on that regard.
Yeah, like Ashit says, the containers are really functional. They have different keywords than most of our other terrains, so it mixes things up a little bit. And most of all, working with these 4X, we need something that's producible, of course. So I think the containers are then one of the options to go for. We can still make that with the 4X, whereas other terrain types are maybe a bit more difficult to make. So it was a good compromise to make, I think, to make more containers. And they're a staple of most Games Workshop tables, so I think it fits in where we need to go and what we need to do going forward.
Okay, I think it's actually worth quantifying when you say 4X, Tom. Do you want to explain to the listeners what you mean by that? Because I don't think everyone will be aware who 4X is.
I think Ashik is more.
Okay, the material we use for the terrain is called 4X. It's a special card. It's a special foam card form, maybe whatever you want definition you want to use. It's produced in mass, and it allows us to produce terrain that is thick, that's not easy to break, that's durable, that we can move around, especially for tournaments such as ours that moves countries every year. We need terrain that is light, that is durable, and that will survive each year. And 4X is a piece of material that allows cutting in a specific way we want, in that can also be printed upon on the whatever we want on them, like whatever colors, textures we want. It is a material that allows us to mass produce with minimal human effort needed. So we can just send in the designs. They will be produced by machines. They will be cut by machines, and they will be just packed and sent to the location we want. And since we have limited time to make the event, because we don't have that much time as organizers to just we only get a few days before the event to prepare everything, and because of our nature of having people from many countries that are separated, we cannot have a terrain day that we can all come together and paint all the terrain. And the way we designed the terrain allows us to disassemble it and pack it up like essentially cardboard, but the material is much more durable than that. So we can just pack it up easy, put it in a box. An entire row of terrain would be a small box that would normally house a normal table's terrain, but now it can house 8. So we can just pack it and send it to wherever we want. It saves us a lot of time and a lot of work hours needed, which is especially what we need, I think, to create the World Team Championships.
Okay, cool. Obviously, I'll just sort of put this in there. If people are listening and are not with, obviously, we've been talking about that there are already maps out there for 8 different tables, because the event, we obviously, when you match up, there's 8 players per team playing. Those maps are actually online already on our Facebook page, World Team Championship. And what I'll do is I'll also put a link in the show notes just so you can have a look as well if you're interested in looking while we're talking. Now, just one of the things obviously thinking about is if you do look at the maps and you compare them to last year's, the thing that jumps out to me straight away is that in previous years we had sort of like this idea of like boards of lighter terrain, much less line of sight blocking, boards were kind of like medium and average level line of sight blocking terrain, and boards were very heavy on line of sight and movement inhibiting terrain. This year, when you guys did the maps, you didn't. Most of the maps are kind of similar in the level of like the amount of terrain and the amount of line of sight blocking. I mean, what sort of influenced that? Obviously, what's the goals? What do you guys want? What's obviously the aim to achieve by changing it from this heavy, light, medium we've gone with previously to what it is now, which is sort of more balanced across the entire range of 8 tables?
Yeah, so that ties in with the mission changes, of course. So it's a completely different game than last year. And I think all the games will be closer because people can choose as secondaries. So there's like less variation in what your army can do or what you hope to do with your army. So I think on the 8 matches that will be played, it will be way closer together, and you will not have these blowout scores like we had in previous years. So in that sense, I think also every table needs to be more balanced to not unbalance the fact that you can choose your secondaries on the table layout or terrain layout. So we chose to have like 8 tables are a bit similar in terrain density, let's say, or what each table hopes to bring to the players in terms of tactical flexibility and ability to hide and whatnot. So yeah, that just ties into that. We think it's needed to have a more balanced table across the entire row than so across the 8 tables for a certain team that they will play on than before. I think the 4 medium, 2 heavy, and 2 light doesn't work anymore because it will just skew the matchups completely. And I don't think in 9 that's something we should be going for.
One thing I would add is the set objective placement. That's in past editions where, let's say you had an disadvantaged matchup against a shooting army, you could have placed a few objectives behind a few ruins that were on the table, hoping to play a defensive game and just work on those objectives to get some points for your team. Now with the set placement of the objectives, you need the proper terrain, so they can't be all in the open by accident or even by design. Like if we did that, like if there were some tables with all the objectives in open, it would simply invalidate a good amount of the armies, and that would create a poorer meta and less diversity of armies in general.
Yeah, I think then the game would just revolve around who has first turn and who needs to jump on objectives and who will die quicker than the other person. So we want to avoid that a little bit, which is why we made sure that on every mission there's at least a couple of objectives that are hidden behind terrain that you can hide from your opponent from. I think it will offer more exciting games and more close games. But yeah, of course, everything is new and we're just basing this on conjecture, not based on real results from games we've played ourselves or feedback we've gotten. So, of course, we might be wrong, but we'll see that in the coming months, I think. But I think our premise is okay, and I think with the experience from the last 10 to 12 VTCs, We have built up some experience in this regard, and I think it's good to be proactive about this. And if we turn out to be wrong, we can still change it, of course. But in our heads, it makes sense to propose a mission pack and terrain layouts like this.
Yeah, and that's the point, obviously, to anyone who's listening. If you guys do sort of want to play on the WTC terrain maps and you've got feedback for us, please get in touch for myself, Tom, or Isik, or your respective sort of WTC captains. At the end of the day, as people know, the World Team Championships, the rules, everything, whilst we sort of like come with the initial ideas, a lot of it is shaped by the people playing, the teams playing, to what they think is the best thing. So if you've got any ideas or any criticism, anything that you think could be improved or slightly tweaked, get in touch with us, because we'll incorporate that into the next sort of variation of the terrain pack, which we're aiming to sort of bring out in the next few months, if I'm right, aren't we, Tom?
Yep. Yeah, so I'm aiming at doing a big revision in December, so all teams can start fresh around January with like revised mission and terrain layout and whatnot, and then we can ramp up for the real deal before March or something, so all teams can really start practicing with the finalized event pack. I think it's important to get it out early so everybody knows what they're in for, because with the new edition, so many things change that if we leave this hanging till the last moment, it will be very difficult for teams to prepare decently, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also important because quite a few teams, quite a few communities use our rules pack actually for their events, for their qualifying events. So even more so, it's important to get stuff out as soon as possible.
Yep, agreed.
So the rules pack, the sort of WTC mission pack. I mean, I've obviously seen it, but everyone else hasn't. And one of the big things with 9-Fed is obviously the games are meant to be quicker. It's all going to be more like a 3-hour game average and a 4-hour game. So one of the things is that we're going to be switching to 8 rounds. I mean, what was Isik? Obviously, you were the first one of us that sort of pushed this idea. I mean, what's your what were you thinking there?
Well, actually, Tom initially put out the idea that, hey, the games will be probably quicker, and he was definitely right. Because all the feedback we got is the games are much more quicker, and the past ETCs, they were always fun events, but they always had the small the idea that, hey, if we played a bit faster, maybe we could squeeze in 3 games. But the games didn't allow that. Like, it would be too long of a day. It was not technically possible, but it meant less fun in the night times and earlier mornings, which we didn't want. But the new games, the new edition, it's faster, it's quicker, and we can actually squeeze in 3 games per day without losing any more time from the day, so we can enjoy ourselves. We just need to be in the venue a bit longer, like an hour more, but it allows us to have more enjoyment.
Yeah, and then obviously we've said 8 games. Everyone knows the WTCs over 3 days. We've gone for 8 games so that we'll finish early on the Sunday. Because obviously historically a big issue is when you finish at 9-10 o'clock on a Sunday night, it's very hard for teams to get food and stuff like that. So the idea is we'll play 3 games on the Friday, 3 games on the Saturday, and 2 on the Sunday, and finish sort of a reasonable time to get the party going afterwards.
And some teams will actually sort of head home right after the tournament ends because they live quite far away. Some teams can only get flights on Sunday evening, so this will help with them as well.
Yeah, we've had that a lot in the past, that players had to leave around 5 or 6, and then they had to not play their last round because they had a plane to catch and whatnot. So with this system, we would get rid of that. And then one of the considerations as well to switch to 8 rounds is that we're getting increasingly more teams that want to be involved in the WTC. So I think we will hit 40 or maybe break the 40 teams mark.
Fingers
and then
crossed.
I think with 6 rounds, you just might not have enough to have a clear winner at the end. So especially if you break 40 teams. So in terms of that, it's also better to switch to more rounds to have a clear and undecided winner for our event.
Yeah. On the topic of rounds, Tom, you've put, at least for WTC, quite a radical thing into the mission pack for day 1 with the first 3 matches. Do you want to explain that to everyone who's listening?
Yeah, so with 8 rounds and having 40 teams or less, there's a chance that people will have to play like a team they've already played. We want to avoid that. So, and then we also want to have like a more World Cup feel to WTC. So we decided to like do a pre-round pot system where people will be divided, or teams will be divided into groups, and then they play like a group stage before going on to the Swiss pairing for the second, the third day. So what we will do is we'll just base ourselves on the previous ETC's ranking, and then team 1 will go into pod 1, team in second place will go in pod 2, and so on, and we'll just fill all the pods so they're evenly divided amongst the strength of the teams. And then these teams will just play each other day 1. So every team will have 3 games amongst equally teams that are equally divided over strength. So team in first place will play 10th, 17th, and 25th place teams, and then team in place 2 will just incrementally play those teams. So the division of strength in each group would be the same. So yeah, that of course has the disadvantage that teams that are savvy can calculate who they will play against. But we will solve that by randomly inserting challenges, because challenges over the years have grown to be a customary thing at the WTC. So you can just challenge a team for a first round that you particularly enjoy playing or whatnot. So we'll just
or challenge a team that you think would be an easy win for you, which some people have tried to do.
Yeah, but there, of course, the team has to accept. So if the team on the receiving end decides not to accept it, then of course it's not really possible. So if they accept it, then why should we say no to that? So it just gives an additional dimension, and it will stop people from knowing who they will play in the pot phase as well, because newer teams as well will be randomly placed in pots as well. So it will shift a bit the dynamic of our placement, and then you will not really know who you will play, because some teams will shift groups because of that. So I think it's a good system to start off the first day, and then you're sure to play teams from different kind of strengths. And yeah, who knows, maybe we'll have a setup here or there. And it also avoids that the really big teams meet each other day 1, and that you have a clear division there. I mean, you want to build up the excitement, and I think with this change we can do that. And then day 2 the tournament will really start. But day 1, of course, you cannot drop any points, and you really need to work for it as well if you're a top team. So I think it's a nice dynamic going forward, and it will increase the World Cup feel of our event, which I think is important. We have like a niche event that is well received and very well regarded across the globe. So if we do this, it will set us apart a bit from other events even more, and it will create a unique feel, I think, for our event.
So how are you going to see the teams? Are we seeing them based on last year's result, or the last 3 years' results, or
we can basically decide how we do it. I think last year's result is okay, because now with the edition change, I mean, all the results from last year's are not really relevant for that. So
I think we can use sort of like the last 3 years, but maybe at most 4, but I think it's fine. And I would like to add what Tom said. Round 1 always was a special thing for the ETC, because you knew who you were going to play a few weeks in advance, usually around 2 weeks. But now you'll have your first 3 opponents known to you, and that will sort of like, because that will increase your preparation efforts. Like, people will be more excited. They will not just simply look at 8 more lists. They will look at 24 more lists, and they will focus on that. They will prepare. They will be more excitement. And since you already know who you're going to play, you can put the extra focus in that to prepare just a bit more harder, and that's always more fun. In my opinion, round 1 was always special, because you always had that sweet excitement that you know who you're going to play, you know the lists, but you might not know the players. So that was always an exciting thing for me, at least.
Yeah, and it will allow as well the 3 lower seeded teams to really step up their game and work their pairing method and whatnot for the top seeded teams. So they will have a harder time, I think, going into the tournament, which is also something that's good for our event.
Cool. So obviously, as you said before, last year was 8th, this year is 9th. Everything's changed. New missions. Chapter approved Grand Tournament Pack came out a few weeks ago. Obviously, introduction now of GW's brought in this idea of primary and secondary missions, or very Nova ITCS style to it. I mean, well, obviously, assuming you guys have managed to play games. I know, Tom, you've been at gaming nights. You were at one on Thursday. What are your thoughts on the missions so far? How do you feel they've been playing?
I'm not overly enthusiastic about them. I think they're a bit too similar all the time. Like the primaries basically don't change except for in one mission where it's a bit more difficult to get the points. But it's always the same, like hold 1, hold 2, or hold more than your opponent. So I think that's a bit limited. I would have hoped that they would have switched it up here or there for that. Maybe it will arrive in the future still, but for now it's very limited. And then the secondary system as well. I always grab back to the same ones because it just depends on the army I've built, not really on my opponent so much. And I've built just an army that can do the secondaries I want. So every game feels a bit sameish, I guess, and your tactics don't really change. So I think that's a missed opportunity because I think if they would have just gone a different route for some of the primaries, that would already switch up the way you play with your secondaries as well. Whereas now that's not really the case.
I agree with Tom 100%. It's like it feels more of a single player game instead of a 2-player game. I mean, you just do your thing and you hope to do your thing better than the opponent's thing a bit more, and you'll ideally you just play the same game, but the opponent, like the background changes, but it's essentially you play the same game, you do the same things, you get the same points. So it feels a bit dull. And this might be sound controversial, but I always found the ITC missions, it was just instead of a 2-player game, it always felt as 1-player game played by 2 people.
And I think that the decisive thing will always be the primaries. Like you have to stop your opponent from doing the primaries because normally your army will be built for almost maxing your secondaries or as close to possible. So I think that's just a deciding factor all the time is, do you go first? Can you block your opponent from being on the primaries for like 2-3 turns? Then you will win. Otherwise you will lose. Simple as that. So I don't really like that aspect. I think there's too little interactivity between the armies because you can just build for secondaries that you can almost auto score. Some armies are of course stronger than others on that front, but I think it's a pity. I think there's limited possibilities there for some armies to do well in this kind of mission packs. So, of course, this is all very new, and then we'll have to see where it ends up. But my feeling so far is not really 100% okay.
Yeah, I do. I mean, from what I've personally played so far, I agree that obviously these missions, and this is no secret to anyone who's played this, or this mission set, the 9th Ed favors MSU. It favors mobile armies, lots and lots of units, and obviously combined arms to counter your opponent doing the same thing, which means that some armies are going to struggle. I mean, I've been playing Custodes. Sure, that Psychic Awakening has made them hard as nails, and the increase of CPs in 9th Ed is great. But honestly, the games with Custodes, you struggle with the missions because you don't have enough. You can't basically have enough lots of chaff units to run up and grab objectives, plant flags, and whatnot. You don't have enough units to sort of sacrifice to go into table quarters and such like. And it's actually, I found it personally a real struggle with the secondaries. I'm literally playing the game of right, what points do I think I'll be able to get, rather than how can I have build an army that makes the secondaries. I think that's quite a negative. And Knights is the other one. I mean, I'm a Knight player as well, and Knights they can't do any of the shadow operations, any of the action missions. They're unable to do that straight away. their opponent's always going to pick Titan Hunter and get guaranteed 15 points basically.
Yeah. So that's something I feel
there is an imbalance. I'm worried that this mission set is going to, as when people listen to the second part, Healer in is talking about this, James, it's going to push the game way too hard into MSU spam, and especially these kind of, like, to coin what Adam Cavallari says, these bus stop armies where you have 300 models on the board that just rush forward turn one, smother all the objectives and say, good luck, you won't be able to kill me in time, and that's the game.
That's basically what most of the games boil down to, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me it's what, a month into 9th Ed. I'm not saying that the sky's falling down, but I'm worried that it's going to end up in the very sort of sharp end of the competitive game, which the WTC is. That's what we're going to have.
Well, to me, it feels
we're going to have eight armies, and each player in each team is just going to basically take a guard horde, cultist horde, and just how many horde armies you put into your team.
And we always had that problem with WTC because it's a national event in its core. So the players are not held down to the regular single player tournament constriction of, oh, do I have that many models? No, you consider the entire country. You can you can collect the right amount of models. So you're not playing against 8 people and their armies. You're playing 8 people and their friends and their club's armies. So it's not at the start of 8th edition, we had more Storm Ravens than players, and hundreds and hundreds of birds. So I think that will be a repeat thing as well if we had the tournament now.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side is that maybe in a year's time, people have been pushing the meta. The meta has been this horde spam, so that people have then actually broken the meta, got lists that work against it to break it down in the meta shifts. But my initial worry is it's just going to be this sort of very dull game of, oh look, I mean, and these are lists that people I know have been sending me. It's like, oh, I've got Max Nurglings, Max Ripper Swarms. It doesn't look like a fun type of. I know it appeals to some people, but to me, it doesn't seem like a fun type of 40k. At the same time, I've been trying not to be super negative. I think the missions are still way better than what the ITC missions were, because they personally were very stale. I think this is definitely a good step in the right direction. And I think the rules, the rule set at 9th is much better than the 8th Ed rule set. It's much cleaner. A lot of the jankiness is gone.
To me, it feels like it's unfinished. I think they just released an initial thing, and here, that's the base premise. But I think with the big FAQs and the chapter proofs that will come, we'll see more missions and more primaries and more secondaries, and then all codexes will receive more codex-specific secondaries as well for their armies. So I think over time we'll build up to have a rule set that's challenging and that's maybe more balanced than what we're seeing now. But of course, we're stuck with what's released at the moment, and that's not, for me, particularly nice. The first few games are okay, and I think if you switch up armies all the time, it's quite okay because each army plays differently. But if you stick to the same army and you start playing tournaments, I think it will become stale very quickly.
Yeah, I think I'm always trying to be optimistic, but I am worried. I'm worried that I'll go to my first tournament and I'll just meet 5 or 6 of the same type of armies, which will just be the end of 8th Ed before COVID hit, and you basically went to a tournament and played 5 or 6 Space Marine armies that are almost identical. We're back to where we were.
The Iron Hands Repulsor list, that was not.
Yeah, or the Raven Guard list. It was just I like variety. That's always been my thing.
Yeah. To be fair, I've seen more variety in 9th than I've seen in 8 or 7, so I think there you don't need to be so concerned because a lot of things became more viable with being able to choose their secondaries and building armies to go for what they've chosen for their secondaries. So I think we'll see more variety on tables.
Well, I think we'll see more variety in Codex. I'm worried that we won't see variety in this army type.
Army types, yeah, true. Yeah.
That it'll be, like I say again, like in Sweden, there's a Swedish Team Champs at the start of November, hopefully, and it's a 4-player event. And I wouldn't be surprised if the really competitive teams show up with, a Guard Horde, a Tyranid Horde, a Chaos like Cultists and Spawn Horde, and I'm trying to think of what forward. Yeah, Chaos Demons, Nurglings. There you go, 4 hordes. But anyway, we're going doom and gloom, and I'd like without making lies stuff, I'd like to make this a positive podcast. So, like you say, it's a new edition. Hopefully, things will pan out.
I think it just needs time.
Yeah.
And there might always be meta solutions to the specific hordes, and some of them will find a combination of specific factions that'll just run through, let's say, the Nurgling horde with some weird rule combination, and they'll just wipe away the Nurgling horde, and that way we'll solve a lot of the issues, possibly.
Yeah. So, other things. Obviously, previously the WTC, we had sort of a point in the missions. You scored points from primary mission, secondary mission, kill points, and such like, and then you compared your score with your opponents and like a count back, and you ended up a score in that game out of 20. As people say, the 0-20 system. Obviously now, because both players can potentially score 90 points in their missions, there's not a sort of a share of a max amount of points in the game. So how you, such as you, Tom, because you've been doing a lot of the maths on this, what are you thinking, and how are you thinking of obviously skewing that to a team event, and obviously scoring for a team event, obviously working it so that teams will get rewarded for close matches as much as you get rewarded for winning a match?
Yeah, so historically we've had like just a 20-0 system. So if you have 8 players, then you can score maximal 160. And then from 86 points for one team, we had a win for a certain team. So at the BTC, the Belgian Team Championships, I already changed that system a little bit, and I increased the increment. So before there had to be 10 points differences between the team, and the team should have at least 86 points to have a win. So that meant if a team had 75 instead of 76, they lost a round instead of draw the round. Or if you had 85 instead of 86, you would go from a draw to a win. So that was too close together, I thought. So for the BTC, I already changed it to 20 points. And I think that already opened up the tournament a lot, because a lot of more teams had draws and it kept everybody closer together. So already there, I thought like, going into the WTC next year, maybe we should do the same thing, because in the past we had lots of occasions where this 1 point like changed the outcome of the tournament completely for a few teams. So I think we should have a bigger margin or a more strict set of rules for deciding how you have a win. I think in the past it was a bit too easy to get a win on the team level. So yeah, of course, we historically always kept the same system because there was nothing wrong with it and teams were used to it. But yeah, I was already going to propose changes to that this year. Of course, the captains would have had to vote on it, and we had no way of knowing if it would pass or not to change the system. But of course, with 9th, we have to relook at everything because yeah, the scoring system has completely changed. So we want a team to have deserved to win over a round. So we passed from having a certain divide between the team to just looking at the individual matchups. So if a team wins 5 out of its 8 matchups, it doesn't matter by how many points, you can have like a 84, 83 win in each game for 5 players, and then you would have won the round. But of course, that seems too easy. So if you have 5 people that win by 1 point to win the round like that. So we said also that the differential between all the players, so all the 8 people combined, between the teams should be more than 100. Basically, what this means, if you have like 5 people winning, they should at least have a difference in score of 20 points, which is hard to do.
Actually, more too, because then you'll lose some points. And
exactly, I was getting to that. So if you win 5 games and you lose 3, then of course, suppose everybody wins with 20 points difference, then the team that wins these 5 matches will only have 40 points difference if you subtract the 3 wins from the other team. So then you need to really work for those extra 60 points to get the win. So we don't know if this is a viable proposition. We need to look at how the scores between the different players evolves over time. I think we need to look at some statistics that are going to get out there. I'm pretty sure Stat Center or whatnot will be helpful in that, or BCP or Down Under Pairings will help us with getting a certain number on that, like what's the average divide between two players when they play, like is it 30 points or more, is it 20 points or more, is it 10 points or more, and we can use those data to relook at that boundary we impose on having the win. But that's a bit the system we look at. So in order to win as a team, you need to at least win 5 games. So if you each win 4, then it's an automatic draw. And if you win 5 or more, then there's a differential overall 8 players to look at. And if you beat that differential and have at least won 5 games out of the round, then you win the round.
I can just imagine people listening to this right now, like, trying to furiously scribble this all down, pen and paper, working out, trying to work back what you've been saying and work out the maths now. I mean, again, people who are listening, we are aiming to have the first draft of the rules pack out this week, Tom. Am I correct?
Yeah, I aim to. So we're redoing the FAQ because, of course, a lot of change. The Games Workshop released a lot of FAQs in the past, and we need to relook all our FAQs towards the changes in the rules as well, which are often very simple changes, but they have an impact on previous FAQ rulings. So we're now working on that aspect, and we're waiting for some feedback from some referees, but I hope to have everything out by Wednesday. So this podcast should be out on Monday, so then 2 days later we should have the first draft of the event pack and the FAQ pack.
Awesome. And even when we're now talking about the actual how the mission scoring and the round scoring. I mean, we've been saying this already on this podcast. People got feedback. Give it us. I mean, we've already had an alternative proposed to us by Team Scotland. I'm correct.
Yeah. So what they propose is just that we return to the old system, but we start with a difference of 28 between the two players, and then for each 3 points that you go above the 28, you score more points. So 28 difference is like an 11-9, and then 31 points difference would be like a 12-8, and so on.
Yeah. So these are definitely things that people, encourage people to explore, play around with, either do the math or actually work it out during the game, because the more information we get now, the better decisions we can make later.
Yeah. But again, if we decide to opt for a system like that and go for 20-0 again, I think we should look at the division between the teams again and maybe not have a 75-86 kind of differential between a loss and a win, but maybe open up that score a bit more so we have more games end up in the drawing region.
Yeah, I think having more games in the draw will be important if we play it, because if we're 40 teams, say, and we play 8 rounds, after 6 rounds, you'll have some, you'll have someone who potentially have won the tournament by that point, if the maths works out. By round 7, if somebody's got 7 clear wins, they may have well won it already. You won't be able to have the event go to the last round. In an ideal world, you want the last round to be the round that decides who the final winner is, not having it sewn up early. So creating a situation where there are more draws will obviously drag that out to the conclusion, to round 8 being the conclusion.
Yep, that was the idea. Yeah.
So to wrap this little segment up, and as I said, I've been playing Custodes. I decided, 9th edition's coming around, new codex, or new edition, time for a new army. I thought, why not challenge myself to learn the new rules to 9th and the new army? And I've always wanted to do Custodes, so I've done that. And like any good Custodes player, I've gone and dumped a load of money on Forge World and got myself a Telemon, got myself some Telemon, Dreadnoughts, Aquilion, Terminators and the like. If I was to play the WTC, well, am I going to be allowed to use these? Because historically, we've never allowed Forge World at WTC.
We have not.
Forge World is becoming more and more, we'll say, mainstream with 40k. The points are in chapter approved now for the Forge World units.
Yeah, so there's 2 things there. So in the past, we have already said no to Forge World because, a lot of the teams come from countries where the wages are not that high. So then to spend 200-300 euros on Forge World models is, of course, not okay. So that's why a lot of the Eastern European countries have always voted no for this. Also because the rules were not balanced in the past, so you always had like these units that were way over the top. Look at the Malefic Lords in the time. I mean, you could include like 7 or 8 in your army, and that was just ridiculous. And there's a lot of different examples like that. So that was also a reason why we shouldn't include them. It's a lot of extra rules you have to learn with a lot of strange interactions. So it would also increase the FAQ work for us to FAQ most of these interactions. So for those reasons, it's simple to say no to that. But recently there's been a new win at Games Workshop, and they have decided to put the Forge World rules writing in the hands of the actual rules writers and not the people from Breck Library or Forge World themselves, which hopefully will make
it's no longer Alan Bly writing it all and Paul Scott checking it all.
Yeah, I didn't want to name names, but okay.
So, well, neither of them at Workshop. Obviously, Alan is in that Workshop for obvious reasons, and Paul hasn't worked there for many years now. So,
it seems like the rules will be brought into line a little bit. Also, with 9th edition, it's the first time actually that globally we'll be playing the same game, because before you had ITC, you had Nova, you had WTC, you had all the different kind of scoring systems. You had Renegade Open that did their own thing, you had Adepticon. So everybody was running a different mission set, which didn't really help like deciding like which kind of meta was the best, or which teams were ahead, or which nations were ahead and whatnot. So we now have a global mission set that I think everybody will adopt. So it would be silly if we from the WTC, as one of the only out there, would say we won't include Forge World, whereas all the other events would allow it. So we're opting for now to include it. We will let our players play with it for a couple of months and then decide how they like it. Like they can vote to have it not being able to play Forge Worlds in December, or just say like, yeah, that's good change, let's keep it. It gives us
or just let custodians play it and nobody else.
We can make those decisions. Player, I support that motion. It's great. It's really great.
In fact, we're all custodians players, aren't we? Tom, you play custodians as well, don't you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And my orcs would be very happy with their Shin orc as well. So why not?
We're not biased at all. So it's not a personal game.
Obviously, this is considered like we don't want to be in a situation where the Marine players are all bringing Max Leviathans and Scorpiuses. So there is going to be probably some discussion there what to be had.
Yeah, I think they will more likely take rapiers than anything else. But yeah, so we're giving everybody the chance to test this, and that's why we force it on them a little bit to say like, okay, you can play with it. We put it in our rules pack, so everybody's forced to check it and play with it, and they don't say no out of knee-jerk reaction, so they don't say like no automatically out of habit or whatnot, but they can actually investigate, play with it, play against it, and then decide how they like it based on real experience. That's basically why we decided to include it this time around.
Yeah, we all for the last few years, we always had the Forge World vote after the events. And traditionally, it sort of became a bit of a laughing joke because it was like we always had the vote, and it always came out no. And I always put it in the vote, with knowing the result as well. If a few of the players really like Forge World because the models are cool, the rules are more varied than the Games Workshop ones, it increases diversity. But now, with the new changes, I think more people might turn around and we might actually have a different result out of the vote.
Yeah, it will be nice to see that. So we'll see in December how people think it is. But to come back to it, Forge World is included. So Chris Haynes, you owe me a beer.
Oh yeah, the Canadian captain. He always
He's the one who.
That's because Chris has got more money. That's because Chris has got more money than sense. I mean, we've all seen his gaming room, his pool, and everything.
Pool, yeah.
Yeah, we're not at all jealous, Chris. Honestly.
No.
So I mean, yeah. I mean, that's that's sort of like to conclude things. That's actually a good point. Come back to this. We put Forge because we want the people who are coming to the WTC, the teams and players, to try it out and then make a decision based off of trying the rules out. Is it balanced or not? And this comes back to the really cool thing. I think it's worth sort of like reminding people at WTC, those listeners who haven't come, is that it is the players who come to this event that make the decisions. Me, Tom, and Isik have ideas. We put those proposals out, just like we get proposals from other teams and other people saying, "Oh, how about this instead?" And what the final rules are, the final mission set, like what's allowed, not allowed, all that, the actual final product that people are going to play with come August, that is all chosen and decided democratically by the teams, which I think is a very cool thing. So I got to bribe everybody to vote for things that I want.
They usually are the ones who bribe us, so I'm great.
bribing and the WTC will always go hand in hand. So
Yeah, and by bribe we mean that people buy us beers and we do nothing about it anyway.
It's
So, have you guys got anything else you want to add before you just wrap this up and move on to the next section with the interviews?
yeah, so I just want to stress for people out there that Ninth is bringing a lot of changes, like smaller board sizes, new missions, new terrain, and whatnot. So we're working hard behind the scenes to deliver. I think we'll buy new gaming mats of a smaller size. I think we'll have Isik produce a shitload of new terrain. We'll have him work hard behind the scenes to make beautiful new containers and forests that are playable and don't have like these little trees on there, so you can actually move into there with your tanks and whatnot, or with your vehicles. So we're very conscious of what needs to happen, and we're working hard behind the scenes. But yeah, of course, in the process, there might be some hiccups. So just everybody, if they see something that's not workable or not working as it should or whatnot, they should just get in touch and give us the feedback on our forums or on Facebook or by private message. That's certainly appreciated.
exactly. Just poke us with whatever you don't like or whatever you do like as well. Just let us know.
Excellent. Right, well, cheers to that, guys. I will catch you later. And after the jump, we'll go into some interviews with Inez, James, and Vili. So welcome to part 2 of today's episode. Today we're joined by Inez Wilson from Team Scotland. Say hi, Inez.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Also, James Ramsey from Teams Wales. Say hi, James.
Hello. I'm Team England now, remember?
Sorry, Team England as well.
I'm a dirty mercenary now.
You'll always be Wales to me, James. And we're also joined by Vili Urpalanian. I'm going to pronounce that wrong. From Team Finland.
Yeah, it went really bad, but don't worry, you're not the first one to miss out, so no worries there. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So we got these guys on. They're all, WTC players, representatives of different teams and sort of different metas. And we thought we'd get the guys on, just sort of chat a little bit about 9th edition and their sort of initial thoughts and feelings on 9th, how it's been going for them, and like what they sort of feel is the meta and the sort of team play meta is going to pan out from this. So just to start off with, I mean, how many games have you played so far? Like, start off Inez, how many games you played? What's your first impressions?
I've gotten 6 games in now. I've played 3 different armies, so I've had a crack with Death Guard, White Scars, and Tyranids because I wanted to get a breadth of the meta. It's been really interesting. Games play a lot faster. It feels like you've got a lot less time to score now because you start on turn 2 and then you're finished by like the start of your end of your turn 5, which is only really 4 turns of scoring. You've got to get so many points in that time. It feels like you don't have time to cross the board, so you've got to be a lot faster with it. And the games play a lot shorter. It's a lot closer in terms of where you are on the board. You're just engaging quicker. So it's been really interesting. Melee armies have been doing really well for me, despite the fact that I thought that they felt like they were going to get pretty hammered by the rules changes. So yeah, it's been interesting in that sense.
Yeah, cool. How about you, Vili? I know you've been playing quite a bit on your Twitch channel. What are you feeling? How do you feel about 9th Ed?
Yeah, so I must say that I'm in love in many ways. I've had now probably like 25 or so games played with Tyranids, Sisters, quite a few of Imperial Knights games. As people were saying, in Finland we have a pretty like tight sort of group of players, so we're chatting every day about the meta, what works and what we think might not work, and a lot of people were saying that Imperial Knights are now dead and there's no way of playing with them, and my goal is to try to understand the game in as sort of a wide spectrum as possible. So I've been playing all types of things, and I'm loving it. Just as In said, the game sort of starts from the get-go. There's no more, waiting for 3-4 turns. You're trying to table the opponent, and then you just rush the objectives at the end of the game. So you sort of have to have a game plan from the get-go, and things get like really handsy fast. I'm in love with adventures. for example, with the miracle dice, you can come from the strategic reserve. So it's been a lot of fun, and every game there's so many like different things which you can analyze after the game, secondaries, and sort of the overall game plan. So yeah, definitely a new breath of life to PK.
Excellent. And obviously, James, yourself, I mean, you've been getting many games in on the Isle of Man?
I've mostly just playing online. I have the club is running, but they were in the middle of an 8th edition event when 9th edition was dropping, so they've been carrying on playing 8th a little bit. So I've been playing 9th online on TTS, which I guess a lot of people have been using, and about 10 or 15 games or so, I'd say. And I think it's the core rules are probably an improvement over 8th. Sorry, they've definitely fixed all of the issues that there were, and some of the strange things like conga lines and some of the kind of rules didn't kind of make sense, which is good. I think that makes gameplay a bit more fun. I'm a little bit nervous about the kind of it's fun that the way the balance has completely like changed. So like all the units that were terrible have now, some of them are pretty good now, and some of the great units are back on the shelf. But it's a little bit nervous about the codexes all kind of being re-released, because I felt 8th was in quite a good place just before lockdown happened, with Marines being nerfed with that FAQ. I thought it was quite a good place. So I'm a little bit nervous about where the balance will lie, but it seems good so far. I'm enjoying it.
Excellent. Yeah, I think everyone knew the worry is with the codex creep. It was a big issue at the end of 8th, so we'll find out what happens when the new Marine book comes out and they put all the chapters, all the rules into one single book. I think that'll be quite interesting.
And fingers crossed that means one Marines list and team events now, right?
Yes. Yes.
I think that's gonna be our proposal for sure.
Yeah, so we might finally get some list diversity.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of the chatter on other podcasts on the internet and stuff is about the first. Is the first turn important? Is going first really important now, or can you win going second? We've heard some people saying that they've only been able to win games going first. Other people have said that you're guaranteed to win if you go second. So what do you guys think about this? Just starting with James, going back to James again. How do you feel about this sort of dynamic about going first, going second in 9th?
I think first turn is important. I don't think it means you win the game automatically. But I do think when you get to if you want to win an event or do well at like a team event, you have to have lists that can play going second. You can't just have a list that's going to rely on going first, because if you get alpha struck going, if you lose a dice roll and you get shot off the board first turn, you've lost. There's nothing you can do about it. Just like if you have an army that just gets pressed in and you can't get out because you've gone second, you're going to lose. So you have to have armies that can play going first, going second, using reserves, using the units that can kind of stop being yourself getting pushed in, but also having a list that can use the ability to go first and not can deliver out of line of sight firepower and use the drop pods are really good. Those kind of units, they're quite good if you go first. So armies that can kind of go first and go second, I found are really strong. Armies that rely on going first or very much like to go first, I find they don't work anymore because it's a 50-50 dice roll. You just don't know what's going to happen, and you can't rely on that going first or second. That's just kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah, how about you guys, Vili?
Yeah, I agree. I agree on most of the points. And for example, now for the sisters, a unit such as Dominions, it plays a huge part on and then it becomes more like this mechanic kind of, or like game mechanics kind of thing, where actually I would prefer this sort of an alternate. If you have like these, let's say Alpha Legion or Raven Guard stuff, or like pre-game movements. I would actually rather start with the player who's going second, sort of who could do the first push, because I find it quite interesting. If you're going first, you have 3 Scout Sentinels, you can actually push to all of the objectives, how the objectives are placed, and it does play a part, but at the same time, I agree on a point that you can't just still build a list which tries to go first. You have to have the redundancy of certain like reserve stuff and so on. But again, I'm pretty sure that we are going to touch on the terrain and table setups later, maybe in this podcast. But that's also one of the big issues, like how the terrain is working, which makes it possible. Of course, the one final point sort of to touch this is that like there's also big differences in the alpha abilities. For example, the Astra Militarum getting this full payload. If you have 2 Manticores or a Basilisk and a Manticore with full payload, that already like makes the game much harder for certain armies if you have those flat trees flying around from the get-go. So yeah, there's small tinkerings which might actually just make the game much better, even if you're going second. So a lot to think about, especially if you're building for a team event. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I find it quite interesting because I've been playing Custodes, and I've actually, the games I've lost are the games I've gone first. I've had sort of the different opinion that I feel like going second, you're able to react more and then sort of dictate how the game flows rather than just sort of rushing forward and hoping for the best. I mean, Inners, like obviously you played a lot of games as well.
Yeah, so
how are you thinking?
Sorry, yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on this. So when I started playing, the first thing that kind of jumped to mind was the first feels like it's better for the primary because you get the ability to, you get more time to react to what your opponent's doing. You're finished your primary before your opponent's had their 5th turn, so you get a bit of advantage there. But the secondaries are generally a little bit easier to score if you're second. So things like raise banners, when you score at the end of the game, you get an opportunity to raise banners on your 5th turn and pop objectives up. You get a bit more time to respond to your opponent's banners. Just things like that. Things like domination, your opponent has to overextend into objectives, you then get to take them off them. But the real thing that I've found a strength for going second is that it's really good for armies that can push into the midfield but can't necessarily push into your opponent's deployment zone. So you'd see something like Triple Keeper Secrets that in previous editions would have to just rush across the board turn 1 to try and get into combat. Now that list is more than happy to take second because it can sit behind obscuring terrain, you can't shoot it, or you're shooting it with indirect fire that's not the most efficient at killing it now with the points increases, and then your opponent has to come to you because they have to get onto midfield objectives now. There's no more, we both place 3 objectives in our backfields and we sit on them and then whoever gets to the opponent first wins. It's now, in almost all the missions, there's central board objectives that if you want to be winning the primary, you've got to be on, which means you've now got to come to me. So if I've got something like Sanguinary Guard or Chaos Spawn for Death Guard, just anything like that can't really get right across the board turn 1 without blowing a lot of CP, but is more than happy to engage the midfield. Going second means that your opponent's in the midfield when you have your first turn now, and you can be in combat turn 1 with all of your power, which you just couldn't do in previous editions. And I really like that because it gives that swing benefit to melee that mitigates maybe you do get shot off a little bit if you go second, but at least you get to go and kill everything on turn 1 for yourself.
Yeah, I have to comment on this because I really love this domino effect of these games where for example the Custodes, like when they extend, then you actually have the possibility to react when you're going second, and I won plenty of games going second, so it's not like you have to go first to win. One thought that I have had is like, would it be better if there would be like, let's say 1 point of primary per objectives at the end of the game, so that would give like a small edge, because I'm feeling at this point everybody's saying like, well, I won the roll off, I'm going first, obviously, so that would bring more thought process to that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that kind of diminishes as we play more games. People are like, the hyperbole online has all been going first is better, so people are just assuming that they should take it. I think as people get more experience, we'll move away from that just by the way that the meta will shape out. You'll just see lists that are more than happy to take board control going first, or if they go second, are more than happy to punish you for trying to take board control. I feel like that's a much more interesting style of game where you're trading back and forth, punishing your opponent for overextending, trying to make sure they don't overextend, and then trying to mitigate the downsides to yourself. And I think that's much more interesting than just shooting each other, or I'm in your deployment zone turn 1 with Kraken Gene Stealers or Sanguinary Guard. It's just more diverse.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I found the games are more dynamic. There is much more this sort of like or chess element to the game. You know, you're setting up positive trades for yourself, looking to create those situations where you're trading positively into those objectives, rather than just sort of like sitting back, camping. You know, ITC camp 2 objectives, try to kill one more thing the opponent, and auto max your secondaries. That was very stale. I mean, I think it's very good now. This sort of, like I say, this back and forth is much more interesting. So sort of moving on, I mean, we touched on Vili, you touched on terrain. I mean, that's obviously a big shift as well for the rules, like obscuring and such like. I mean, do you want to give your thoughts on that? Like with the new terrain rules, how that's affecting the game?
Yeah, so let's just a bit of background. So I actually have a garage where I can like set up 3 tables, and I now have I can do like any of the tables. For example, the proposal pack now, proposal pack. So I feel very like I'm big on terrain. I really want, for example, in Finland, so that we're sort of training with the correct terrain, the correct tables, because that just gives such a big edge on the tournament itself. I really love the obscuring element. For example, here we've had those big L's blocking the line of sight. Then it's also having those now these dense terrains, which I love, and they definitely give an edge to a type of list. So I'm really happy about sort of this more streamlined, easy to understand, same for everything kind of terrain that GW has now made for us, and it's in the proposal pack. Then one sort of question or idea is then to sort of find the perfect balance of having do we want to have those sort of L's where you can sort of go big deep, or do we want to have like those big sort of squares of ruins and so on, but that's a big discussion to be had, and that of course affects a lot about the meta and the armies as such, but yeah, definitely I say to everybody that like test and like build those terrains and test them as much as possible, because that actually makes the game like much better if you have the terrains like correctly and you have a certain variance to it, but not to go overboard to either way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in 8th, which was the end of 8th, and a lot of people sort of played more standard boards, there was sort of this feeling that, you know, you had the big L's to hide behind and they dominated the board, and everything else was kind of very much secondary. Didn't have, often the other pieces of terrain didn't have as much of an impact on the game. I mean, James, how do you think like the new terrain rules, think they're having more impact on how you have to play the game, how you have to plan your game out? Or do you think this is very sort of like moody, just sort of go ahead as you would have done before?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. It's a very interesting change. The L's were definitely the big deal. You know, big giant ruins in the end of 8th are basically what everyone was using, because, or, you know, obviously the bottom line of sight, you know, kind of ITC change everybody was playing, and that was kind of what everybody had to do, because nobody had terrain that otherwise worked. And I was very used to playing like kind of the glass hammer boards, like WC terrain, massive L's everywhere, which did make some armies much more playable. I find I'm not such a fan of them in 8th, these big giant L's. I prefer, you know, the idea of the open doors and open windows and being able to see through them if you want to take the risk of, you know, make the choice of I'm going to purposely go like touch it and see through it, but I'm going to then be able to receive fire myself. So I like that kind of balance. That seems like a nice thing to do. Not sure how that would work in like too much like with a full terrain, because obviously depends if everybody's got those kind of ruins. People might be still using the big L's they made back in 8th and might not have time to make loads of new terrain. I like how a lot of the like we said at the old ETC WTC, we just had really ruins, craters, and forests. That's kind of all we had, and the craters and forests just exactly the same, and the ruins did, you know, the line of sight blocking. Whereas now you have different things, and the way the dents works is quite interesting. It can make quite a big difference, and obviously the reducing your movement as you actually move through things rather than charging, kind of that makes a big difference as well. So you actively, do I want to move through that and protect myself from being charged, or I'm going to take a penalty of moving through it? So there's more of an advantage. Because I mean, when I used to play my Tau, I would just sit in the old forest because there was no benefit, there was no downside to me. I never charged anything, so it's like, yeah, I'll just sit in the forest. Why not? Whereas now, you know, there is a bit of a trade-off. So I like that idea of the terrain. You're having to make decisions about if you're going to use it or if you're not going to use it, because there's advantages and disadvantages to using it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, so a quick comment from me to this sort of James brought up. Probably the big thing for me for Ninth is that there's a lot of decisions you have to make. Whether it be like whether should I go to this terrain so that I can do something and then something can attack me, but also the actions. That's something that I really enjoy, sort of having that thought process and sort of analysis, sort of like what do I decide rather than just sort of like in eighth, many of the games the players were just sort of rolling the dice and there was not that much like actual decision making, especially if you knew the matchup. You could literally just like play it by yourself, like solitaire style. But now there's lots of different things you have to take into consideration. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think risk versus reward is a big theme in the 9th edition rules. Like you see that a lot in the missions as well. You know, go big, go home kind of thing. And I think it's brought in a very interesting dynamic. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I personally found playing ITC towards the end became quite stale because you built your army to always guarantee your secondaries, and it basically came down to if you could hold one more than your opponents or kill one more unit than your opponents.
ITC was the same mission with 6 different hats on. It was very boring.
So, I mean, before we sort of look at like team play and like the how you guys think 9th is going to sort of affect team play, I mean, just talk about obviously the games, what you guys are playing. I mean, right now, what would you sort of say is your favorite army going into 9th? Like, if you were to play in a tournament tomorrow, like what army would you bring to it and why? I mean, is there anything that's sort of like standing out to you guys? Is like this is an army I really want to play?
Yeah, I'll take this one to start. So the first, there's kind of 2 armies that I really want to play at the moment. One is a ridiculous Tyrannid build with just all the Rippers, all the Spore Mines, Spore Assist Biovores. It's not fun for me. It's not fun for my opponent, but it makes the light die in their eyes, and that makes me happy.
How many models?
It's like 50 Rippers, 105 Biovores, 2 Spore Assists, 12 Zoanthropes, like all the good stuff. It just stands there, never dies. I've tabled 2 people with it. It's hilarious. I had a squad of 10 Custo Jetbikes in combat with a squad of Zoanthropes for 3 turns. They killed 1. They died. Just, all that good stuff. And then the list that I'm like really excited for at the moment is White Scars, because they've got some really cool options with the new update to their chapter tactics. Things like Plasma Inceptors, Grav Devastators, and a Rhino that can advance and shoot and have like a 45-inch threat range before you add on their guns or before you're on the advanced roll, so they can like touch the backboard edge from the back corner, and they can like dip around ruins, move twice with the Rhino, disembark, shoot anyway. So you can like catch things that are trying to hide in behind L's and things like that. It's just a lot of tricky options in an army that's got some really good combat options as well. So I'm quite excited for White Scars, but I'm holding off on playing it because the book's coming, so I don't want to buy all the stuff for it. But if I was going to an event tomorrow and I was like, well, I'm going to play an army, I would be looking at picking that up because it would be so much fun.
Fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm playing a White Scars army. I was playing against White Scars army tomorrow. I was looking at my friends' list. I was just like, how do I beat this? Like the mobility and all the toolbox of the Marines, especially with like the Outriders and the Eradicators, what they bring to the table. I'm just looking at going, like my custodians do not have an answer for this. Just that's what it feels like on paper, at least. I mean, how about you, James? What's been sort of tickling your fancy?
Oh, so many different things. I started off with I was playing AdMech a lot, but thinking about WTC last back in February, kind of March. I was playing a lot of AdMech, and I was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to be using these. And then I found that they've changed the most, and I kind of I haven't played them as much, but because they need you have to completely throw away all your ideas of how to play AdMech, like back from 8th. So it's like you used to just play a gun line, and now you have to play a non-gun line because it almost doesn't work just playing a pure gun line. So that's been quite fun, and I've been really enjoying going back to using demons again, because demons have got some really nice things in and generally in Chaos. I've just got some really nice things from War of the Spider, like Death Guard and Chaos and Thousand Suns, the way they all can interact together. It's been really fun. So many good options in terms of you can build lists that can play all the phases, are really survivable. You've got reserve options. And I feel like most Chaos units are viable right now. There's not many Chaos units that are, that have got no use at all. Even like Magnus and Morty, you can you can play them. They feel pretty good now. Maybe not top tier.
Even mutilators.
I think
Emperor's Children mutilators are legitimately really good. Do not diss the mutilator.
Yeah, there are. I mean, with the points changes, a lot of those bad units didn't go up at all. So that suddenly they're already 15 or 20% more efficient if you look at it in that kind of way.
The fact that Chaos Spawn are one of like the top 10 units of the game at the moment just makes me happy. So
Spawn are decent. I mean, like there's a point in some game where you might actually if you kill a character, with a spell, you might actually bring a spawn out because it might get on the objective and contest it for you, for example. Which before it was unlikely because people didn't really fight on objectives that much. It was more just I'm going to stand on them because I've got a Maelstrom card, or it's end of the game. Whereas now the fighting is all on the objective. So I found like the psychic powers that were really short ranged, they're now really powerful. I think that's why Death Guard have gone up, because a lot of their short range weaponry has suddenly become way more deadly. Nurglings, I mean, everyone knows Nurglings were already good and they are still like very, very efficient and very good. And I think we're just waiting for Demon. I think I really like the Demons. It's just waiting to see if they get some new rules, because the Engine War stuff was really good for them. They gave them some really nice things, but I still think some of the units could do with a few tweaks to the rules. I'm looking forward to seeing how they get changed.
Demons still feel like an army that just doesn't have good units in enough slots. Like, other than Nurglings, its troops aren't great at the moment. Its fast attack options aren't particularly impressive. Neither are its heavies or its elites. You can maybe get away with like one or two to abuse a stratagem, but filling out like a brigade to try and get the number of HQs you want for demons just isn't an option at the moment. And that really sucks for trying to get like, you want to run like the 5 Exalted Greater Demons, it's going to cost you so many CPs just to get off the ground for starting it now. I feel like they could do with just some better options in their non-core slots, because they're struggling with HQs at the moment. The Supreme Command really hurt Chaos in that way.
Yeah,
there were some armies that really needed it.
I feel like obviously losing Supreme Command means that if you're going to run loads of Greater Demons, they are sadly probably not as easy to get anymore. But I still think the summoning is really useful. Being able to bring in, like, if you want to bring in some Flamers or you want to bring in some Beasts on an objective, they are pretty good. And obviously Nurglings are really good, efficient troop units. So a lot of people are trying to get like patrols or battalions that are to unlock those HQs. Well, Nurglings are a great choice, as long as you don't care about the low key. Because if you want to bring keepers and you want to bring advance and shards, then
you can do like a battalion and a patrol, and that gets you 5 Greater Demons, but you're starting with like 2 CP by the time you've done all your stuff. It's kind of disappointing that demons have all these cool stratagems that are all very situational, and you're going to have like 4 CP to use them in a game. Yeah, it's just not really like an interesting way to. But if you could run things like, if Soul Grinders were a little bit cheaper, or you could justify running like their fast attack choices of Furies were just like, why would you run a Fury when you can run a Nurgling? Is kind of where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, things like, for example, like Blood Crushers have got a really great strat, being able to double charge, but they're so expensive, it makes them probably not worth using right now. But they've got like the actual stratagem's really powerful. So if they bring that into the new book, I assume they'll probably copy a lot of these Psychic Awakening stratagems into the new book. Then they could have a place if they're a little bit cheaper or a little bit more viable.
It's like, sorry, James.
I do think that you will see demons probably not solo. You're going to see them mixed in with other Chaos, because I definitely think Chaos is still more powerful if you soup in all the bits and pieces together, which will hurt you CP wise, but it brings so many advantages to the army. So being able to bring Nurglings and maybe like a Lord of Change or something as a really survivable spellcaster, but then bring in the efficiency of 1,000 Suncasters or Death Guard, their ability to deal so much damage, or having a theme of Death Guard and bring in sorcerers and all that. I think the Chaos is really in a really good spot. It's just I think Death Guard maybe are the best because they've got the most new stuff with War of the Spider, but I'm sure
Blight Lords and Plagueburst Crawlers are a little overtuned.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a combination of the missions and the tables and all them that's kind of really helped Death Guard. If we were playing on the old missions and the old tables, they probably wouldn't feel as
that's fair. It's all just a perfect storm for short range melee armies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Vili, we know you like your sisters.
Yeah.
But if we sort of move the question on a bit and say, instead of just like, what army would you play? Like, what army do you think is probably got the most improvements at coming into 9th? Like, which army do you think is like really been able to up its game now?
Yeah, I'm thinking this again from a quite wide, and of course the guys were already going on about Death Guard, for example. Just the idea that you can actually go up to 4+ invulnerable save. Now with the Death Guarding, you can just like sit and that and sort of storm the middle of the field, and that will get you far in the game. Astra Militarum, I feel like Imperial Guard, it's just like crazy because now you can just have like a buttload of those infantry squads or even conscripts running up the field, and especially if when you have to have this kind of a combined arms approach to the list building, you can't just as you already said, for AdMech you can just go all guns. You have to actually have something that can push the table. So actually having those full payload stuff sitting at your corner, the tank commanders can now hit stuff. There's no more -4 disco lords or allied flyers flying around. So you're actually bringing like lots and lots of brutal shooting, and then you just can fill the table with your full slugging Imperial Guardsmen. And actually one list concept that I've been going around is actually just going with the Castellan and then just filling the floor with the Astra Militarum guys. The Castellan with the new engine war stuff, it's just brutal. You get to reroll you get to roll like those 2 dice for the Volcano cannon. You're not Volcano lance, so you're like, it's really sort of a high percentage guy. Even now the chance to really whiff with everything becomes really hard, and then again, even if the opponent can see it, it doesn't matter because they still have to take it out in a turn. So and they have to also focus on the Imperial Guardsman if they want to win the mission. So yeah, Astra Militarum, I'm really liking how they work now with the new missions.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were saying about the Castellan as well. I think Castellan, that's going to be something we'll see more of. Like you say, I've seen lists with sort of Triple Crusader, 60 guardsmen. I've seen a list banded around. It was like 130 or something guardsmen in Castellan. That puts a real question on your opponent. Can they deal with all those guards that they're basically just stopping the objectives? And then, like you say, the Castellan is just wrecking face with 12 CPs to burn, plus obviously CP regen. It's going to be hard work, definitely. I mean, so obviously WTC Squadcast is to focus on this. Obviously, our idea is this podcast focused on team play. So obviously, everything's changed. Everything's new. The rules have changed. The missions have changed. I mean, how do you think like the changes to, especially the missions, will affect sort of like how team play? I mean, do you think there's going to be more focus on sort of objective denial armies that can sort of like potentially auto-max their secondaries? I mean, starting with you, James. I mean, when you go into list building now, you're looking at like the questions need to be answered from a team perspective. Are the missions going to be something that's going to be influencing your decisions there?
Yeah, I mean, the way I don't know. It's hard to say because I'm not playing masses of WTC caliber opponents, and we're just using I've just been using the tabletop, the TTS kind of board. So I've been look at the WTC trainings, but it's hard to say. But I do think you can see armies being broken down into 2 different types. From what I can look at it, you can see it as board control armies and as kind of almost like damage dealing armies. And I think both those kind of are the things I've been looking at. And but board control armies are going to be using, we know what they are. They're things like the Rippers and the Biovores, your spores everywhere. You've got Nurglings. You've got like the Guardsmen running across the board with just billions of Guardsmen jumping everywhere. Scions dropping in and Rattlins everywhere. They're that kind of army. Using the terrain, like with the new terrain, being able to just push and just press you in, and it's really hard to get through all those little squads. And I feel like those armies, don't have as much control over their secondaries in terms of they're going to pick like razor banners and so on, but they maybe struggle to stop your opponents picking some of the secondaries against them. I found, whereas the damage dealing armies are a bit weaker on the primary because they don't have the ability to press hard, but you still need fast obsec units. Even if you're playing like AdMech, like a gun line, you still need something that can go and like press your opponent on the objective, like stop them getting that objective, for example. You still need screening to stop them from just infiltrating the whole army. Like if you're playing Nurglings, if you don't have anything that can deploy, further up the board, they're going to put potentially 50 Nurglings or plus in front of you, and it's going to be impossible to move. You're going to get stuck. You need things that can stop that. But I find those armies are generally more elite, and they can manipulate the secondaries a bit better. So you can make 3 things that are really hard to kill, 3 hard characters, for example. Maybe you can make so you don't have as many tanks or as many models, so they can't pick the kill models or kill tanks or bring it down, whatever it's called. Sorry. They often can do. They might have good psychers as well, so you can do some of the psychic secondaries. But I found they're much weaker on the damage dealing armies, like the old traditional kind of armies that would just shoot off the board in a couple of turns. They are very weak on the primary, and so it's just can you balance that out with the ability to stop yourself just getting overwhelmed in those first couple of turns.
Yeah. I mean, Innes, Vili, how do you guys feel about this as well? Do you think that there is going to be sort of shifting army style?
I mean, we're definitely going to see different styles of armies now. Like James said, there's going to be armies that try to push aggressively to stop you from winning on the primary, and there's armies that try to stop you from being able to engage with them winning the primary, is basically the way I see it. So are you either playing defensively and trying to shut down your opponent, where you'll see things like the Nurglings list, maybe you'll have like PBCs or whatever like that, is just to keep them honest, to say you're not going to be able to engage with the Nurglings to stop me from winning the game. Or there's lists that are going to say that are going to just be, all right, we're going to just try and push you in. I'm going to be in your opponents on turn 1 with Sanguinary Guard or White Scar stuff, or 3 Keepers of Secrets, and you're just going to say, we're going to kill all your stuff and then I'm going to win the primary that way. Where you're just trying to say, you can't be near me, which means that you're not scoring primary, I'm scoring primary, and you're preventing your opponent from coming to you rather than you're absorbing your opponent, kind of thing. And I think they play quite differently, and when you match them up against each other, that's where the interesting things start happening. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to sort of trend, but they both look like manifestations of the same list. They're both board control lists that are doing different approaches, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just a different way of looking at it. And then in pairings you'll see things like, well, we'll try and keep our board control armies away from each other because then it just swings to a first turn roll off and things like that, and it makes pairings a lot more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously playing a team tournament in a few weeks, aren't you, Innes?
Yeah, 6 weeks from now-ish.
Yeah, so that's something as well. It's like, do you think previously lists were sort of like, it was very skewed. Lists were skewed towards answering a specific question or posing a specific question to an opponent. Do you think that's changing? If you're going to go more all comers, or that kind of dynamic will still be there in team
what
play?
You can kind of do is when you build a list, you can sort of build in little questions, like you can say, okay, my Space Marine list is going to bring 2 Judashars, because if you want to play a combat list, you've now got to get through Judashars. And that puts a question on your opponent that says, if you don't have mixed arms, I'll beat you. So lists kind of these toolbox options that they're adding to things. So Foul Blightspawn, Judashars, just bringing something shooting output, like I know we don't use 4-draw, but like a Relic Whirlwind Scorpius or whatever the equivalent. So say the new invaders that just sit there and shoot you to death. You've got to have a shooting answer to them, because if you try to close the gap to them, it's not going to work. But then there's also things like, if you just try to exclusively deal with the Death Guard armor by combat, you can't just charge into Blight Lords that are stood with Foul Blightspawn. So I think the amount of options that we've got with lists now, where you're going to have to fight in the mid board, how you fight is up to you. It's going to push people towards mixed arms, because you just will see lists that you can't deal with them with a unilateral threat anymore. You can't just sit and shoot people, because if I go Cloud of Flies or the Genestealer Cult hide a thing stratagem on piece of terrain and say you can't shoot me, well, you're not winning the game then. So you're going to have to mixed arm it up, and that pushes team lists in that same direction, where either you're going to get bullied around in pairings by 2 lists that have 2 Judashars and 3 Blightspawn, and then your melee list does nothing in pairings and gets a terrible matchup somewhere else, or you bring a mixed arms list and you play a game. And ultimately what we're looking for, WTC, I think, is for 8 great games to go down. We're not looking for 4 great games and 4 people who got tabled on turn 1 because they had a bad matchup. So going towards that mixed arms is a lot more interesting in team pairings for me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Billy?
yeah. I would just add that I agree with the guys on sort of having that combined arms approach to the list building. You can't just be a one-trick pony in a team event. If you're going to be paired up bad, then you're just going to cost the team probably the round. I would actually add this kind of an X factor into the list. Is for example, I'm looking at some point to actually try out AdMech or Astra stuff where you actually have a lot of those OPSEC guys just sitting in those transports. That's also something when you can actually do those emergency disembarkations. You can do the escaping from the melee stratagem. So those are also there's going to be always also these kinds of I feel like tricksy kind of. So you have those two, you have to have the board controlling list, and then you have those sort of pusher lists. But there's sort of, if you can mix, there's a chance for certain armies that you can sort of throw in some magic with these kind of stratagems and complex, well, not always complex, but you can have this tricksy plays there, and that will also make the pairings and the team tournament a very, very interesting thing, because we want to have those 8 great games where actually the round is decided in the 8th game by the better player who actually knows the stuff better instead of just somebody seized. So there's going to be lots of thoughts going and preparing into the WTC.
Just quickly on transports as well, I dropped a Demon Prince's Inch for 2 rhinos in my list, and that scared me, and it made the list better. So 9th edition confuses me.
Yeah, transports are really interesting. I think they're probably one of the biggest changes from 8th, because you very rarely saw transports, apart from maybe the AdMech Dune Riders, because they were just so efficient.
Yeah, it was Dune Riders and Impulsors and Drop Pods because they were pushed as hell, and that was about it.
But
now it feels like the only transport that's bad is the Tyrannocyte.
Yeah, probably. That's even things like Tauroxes, which you never saw apart from back in 8th, right, like the Index days. They're actually quite useful now. They've got a job, and I've seen people using 10+ transports, which is a very big shift to what they used to have.
What's your plan for engaging? Sorry. You go first.
The Tauroxes. I actually heard a few people have been doing that. Was it the flying Taurox list? Just that idea that you can just drop all that, you can get those, coming in off the sides, deep striking them in, and just flooding the board with transports. It's just going to be really hard to deal with.
Yeah, you'll even see stuff like with the Necrons getting their new update, with their having a faction with OBSEC just natively. Stuff like Ghost Arcs could even be cool with that. You could even see things like Devilfish with 10 breaches inside. It's not, you don't want to close on that, because if you close on those breaches, they do so much damage up close. Transports really do feel like one of the unsung stars of the edition, where they hold your OBSEC, they keep your OBSEC alive for the most part. You can deal with the things that are threats to them, and then you've controlled the board with speed, and now you control the board with bodies. It's just more of that board control fighting in the middle, and transports just give you a way to do that quickly, which not all armies have scouts or incursors or nurglings that can advance deploy on the objectives. Sometimes you've got to get there, and rhinos, devilfish, Ghost Arcs, Taurox all give you, even like Double Flamer Chimeras have been popping up a lot, are all a great way to do that in a way that doesn't require you to pay that premium for advanced deploy.
Yeah. I mean, to sort of touch on what you guys are saying, because obviously how it feels like the game armies shifting more towards combined arms rather than skew. If that's the case, and 6 months down the line it pans out that people are those sort of people, this is where generally armies, and even in team play, armies are moving towards a sort of like combined arms, more all-comers style lists. Do you think then there would still be a need, a team event, to have different grades of terrain across the board? So this idea we have light, medium, and heavy terrains, which obviously enters the dynamic into your pairings and selection when you're pairing up against your opponents to try to mitigate if you go up against a skew list, or maybe even accent the power of your skew list. If you went to combined arms, do you think there'd be a need to still have those kind of different levels of terrain?
I think an interesting way to approach it would be, rather than having because we're advised to have 15 to 18 bits of terrain on the board now. I think it would be interesting, instead of amount of terrain. So, for example, in WTC last year, or ETC last year, we maybe had like one table with 8 ruins, one table with 1 ruin and 3 woods and 3 craters. It was the same amount of terrain, maybe, but like there were tables with a lot more terrain, a table with a lot less terrain. If it changed more to something like this table has a couple of big laws blocking ruins and then a lot of craters and woods and walls and small ruins, this one has a lot of big pieces, so you can mitigate advantages through like the type of terrain. So if you're really struggling against the charge army, you can pick the table that's got maybe like 2 or 3 more craters and woods, so that you've got that defense against the charge. Or if you're really worried about getting shot off the board, you can pick the one that's maybe got like 10% more ruins and walls that you can hide behind. So it's not amount of terrain, it's like the specific type of terrain. So you pick a type of terrain that benefits your army rather than the level of board density that benefits your army. I think that would maybe be a more interesting direction. And you could still have like you could have like 2 slightly heavier tables, 2 slightly denser tables, one maybe more open, one more foresty, and then you kind of just swing it that way, where you still have a slight gradation, but you don't go from like the table 1 to table 8 jump where it's just an insane amount of difference. A game that plays on table 1 and a game that plays on table 8 shouldn't be decided by the terrain now, but maybe the way you approach the game could be different based on like what the board is now.
Yes, you could almost say maybe bring in sort of themed boards, where a board sort of like rotates around a particular terrain type rather than a volume of terrain. I mean, Isik, you paying attention to this?
Yeah. Hey, I have the PDF open and I have my notes.
Wait, Isik is here?
I do think the boards are much more balanced. Looking at the WTC pack, first kind of draft, they are a lot more balanced. I mean, like I played 6 games on table 8 last year, and it was with the Tau, and it was like you said, 1 ruin and 2 small ruins, 1 ruin and a few craters. There are no boards.
Let me guess. First defender every game, right?
That's the thing.
And let's be honest, less than one person each game had fun in your games, right? Less than one.
The one person who won was a little bit happy, but it was just like 1 turn of shooting, and then it was like 3 hours of standing around. But those boards influence the. I mean, okay, the lighter one. You could say the lighter one was very interesting, but we actually found the heavier ones had the biggest influence because there was so many ruins on those tables. A gun line was almost any shooting was almost useless.
Good, screw shooting.
So bad. If you had shooting, you were at such a disadvantage. You needed to be able to fight basically. So I think all those boards that pack is way more balanced than it was last year. In terms of even table 8 and table 1 are much closer together than they were, because like Tau playing on the old table 2 or 3 was impossible. Whereas, if you're playing broadsides anyway, if you're playing Riptide's a bit more playable. Whereas now, table 8 it's got less, but there still is a decent amount on there. Like a combined army could still play on that. But I do like the idea of maybe having some different types of terrain. I just do think you should always have. I never liked like 9 broadsides back in it, where it was literally just you can't hide. I'm just going to shoot you, and if you've got bigger guns than me, I'm going to lose. But if otherwise, there isn't really any strategy to it. I think the terrain does make those games much less viable, and that's a good thing, right? Because nobody really wants just like a first turn, I win, you lose kind of thing. It's there's no skill in that really.
Yeah, I played on tables. Sorry, Vili. Sorry.
One thing that we have the option now is having the keywords, which allow us to add whatever we specifically want into the terrain. So and Vili sort of personally gave me a good amount of feedback, and he's giving me like regular updates because he played a lot. So it's like adding obscuring to something or not sort of really changes the game. It might be the same terrain, but just adding a rule sort of changes everything now.
Yeah. So for example, the discussion about the woods or the forests, do we want them to be obscuring or not? That for example can make a big difference in a table. And I do agree with you guys on sort of having those themed kind of tables. So we're fighting. So it's not like every one of those 8 tables. It's like it's a ruined city, and then is it like the downtown or the outer skirts of the city? I would have the forest fight, and then we would have the sort of spaceport where we have a lot of containers maybe some ruins, and then we would have like those city fight stuff. But also one really important thing that we have found for game balance is that most of the objectives you have on the table have to be so that you can sort of hide behind an obscure, like a ruin, a closed ruin, where you can just sit there with the custodians and nobody can get rid of them.
Yeah, we've had it like you can maybe from a couple of angles you can hide, but they're never in terrain anymore, so you can't be like in the corner of an L facing into your deployment zone, stood on an objective. You can hide from like one side of the board, but if your opponent moves or has units on the other side, you can still be shot, and that we've found that gives a decent bit of counterplay. We played on WTC board 7 today, and that was pretty good for that. Like you could hide behind the L for maybe 1 or 2 models on an objective, but if you wanted to fight like straight, if your opponent was just fighting you straight across, you weren't hiding, but you were engaging with each other, and that was much better for me.
Yeah.
Just as a quick note to people who listen if they're not aware, when we're obviously talking about WTC boards in the pack, I'll put it in the show notes, the link to the sort of like initial draft of the like the board proposal we came out with. We listed out all the boards, all the missions, like what we think the train is. So if anyone's listening wants to check those out, please do and give us feedback. Obviously,
they're great. You should really do it.
Yeah, they are pretty good. Though there are a couple ones I'd like to tweak. I think board 6, I believe, is the one I think's not working as well as we wanted to.
With the forest ones, you mean?
No, board 6 was the one with lots and lots of containers. I think that was a weaker one.
Just because the containers don't quite do enough rules-wise.
Yeah. But yeah,
Just
overall, it's done well, I think.
Sorry, no, just out of curiosity for guys, how are you playing ruin bases just generally? Like, are you playing that you can still walk up to the edge of a ruin, tow onto it, and then you can now see through it if it's got windows on it? Are you playing the entire base if it's got like a base from corner to corner, it's like a 9-inch base? Are you playing that counts if there's windows on it? Or are you playing closer to the wall? Because we've been finding that, like, if you have like sort of like the 9x9 ruins that have got the entire thing based, like it's a 9x9 tile, like we've been playing that you have to be like underneath a floor or something like that to be on the ruin base, and you can't just pull onto cover anymore, because we found that it root invalidates the obscuring keyword for a lot of times. But I'm just curious how other people have found that.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback I got directly from Brad Chesley's, of the playtesters, was that, make the bases, either remove the bases entirely from the ruins, or make them follow the contour of the wall and maybe like with like a 2-inch wide contour. This kind of huge triangular base now, or even like a huge square base in a ruin.
Yeah,
like you say, it doesn't help the game. It sort of makes the whole obscuring thing fall apart.
I take it you guys aren't doing like walking up to like the outside of a ruin with a knight, putting your toe against the wall and saying, I'm in this cover now. I'm thinking that's just not a thing anymore, because it was never really a thing in 8th. We just kind of agreed to do it. Yeah,
well, the rules say now, the actual rulebook says within, and it's very clearly defined. You must have some of your base within. So
just touching the wall now, it doesn't do it for you.
Touching isn't sufficient. And that's actually something we discussed last night, wasn't it, Isik?
Yeah, well, there were a few questions, and that's at the moment the current ruling is you have to be inside the terrain, like not from the outer edge. And the terrain we have at the moment currently working on has limited amount of base, just around 35 millimeters, so an inch and a half inside. So you cannot come from the outside and be in the terrain anymore. You have to be in the inside, and you have a lot of empty space that you can use to hide behind the terrain. So you're not.
That sounds much more interesting to me.
I always felt the bases were really just to keep the terrain from falling over. Right?
Keep them standing.
Whereas
I might just like mark a line on all my ruins that says, if you're within this, you count. Otherwise, it's just there for decoration. Suck it up, buttercup.
If you have those giant, like these guys said, if you have those giant areas of those bases, you've got those big, they say a big square ruin, and if you just touch the edge of it, you can see all the way through it. Well, it doesn't make sense.
Why even have it there, right? Yeah.
So it does need to be repainted, definitely, by like the tournament organizers sort of need to readjust their terrain, because that's the large squares.
That's what, like, at the club we've got that problem with. We've made Simon, who does a lot of our terrain stuff. He's got brilliant boards, but he's kind of like, I don't know, not sure really how we're going to do all this, like change all the terrain. So that's why as a tournament community, it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt to these changes.
Yeah, I know one of the club here in south of Gothenburg that organises the Swedish team champs. They obviously pulling their hair out because they've got terrain that is big ruins on big triangular square bases. And I just said to them, why don't you just paint, like get the base and just basically paint the boundary. So if your base is currently grey, paint to the majority of it green and leave that kind of like grey band close
it helps
to
it
the
stand
wall.
up without ruining the gameplay experience.
Yeah, and then if you're on the grey band, you're inside the obscure terrain. If you're on the green part, you're outside the obscure terrain.
Just get some tape, colored tape, and put the tape on, and you can even remove it from later. It's not that hard.
So how about you, Vili? How do you? I mean, like I say, if people aren't aware, Vili has his own Twitch channel. He has been streaming a lot of games in the past few weeks. You're on. It feels like you're on like 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, how do you feel about the terrain and how the terrain's been working? And like, obviously, this idea of theming boards rather than going heavy, light, and dense.
Yeah. So yeah, as I've already said a couple of times that like I'm big on terrain. I'm building it, and I, for example, built 16 containers to have them ready to test out the different tables. And yeah, I agree with the guys. So like we have said, so like we have had these. There's a big triangle. Actually, there's like a nice on some of the ruins. They have like this kind of square sort of. What is it called? But like we can say that okay, like when you're within these squares in the ruin, that means that you are in the ruin, and if you're like in the middle of the triangle, then that doesn't count. So yeah, I'm definitely going to do that painting, and then again one interesting thing is always that like people are putting 50 or 100 hours to build an army, like to paint it properly, and then you play like. Some play 3 hours, some play 50 hours per week, and then you don't have 2 hours of hobby time to actually just build terrain. So my like tip for everybody is like build the goddamn terrain and make it good, make it standard, and then you're going to have so much more fun. So like put 1% of your hobby time to terrain, and the world will be much better.
Cool. So moving on to the last sort of part, looking at this again, if you can answer this sort of from a team perspective, or this can be quite general to sort of single play. I mean, big changes, the terrain, the missions, and everything. Obviously, previously in 8th, there was very specific armies, very specific codexes. Space Marines, Eldar, for example. There were always the same kind of codexes that gravitated towards the top of tournaments, and there were those that people, if you took them, you knew that your odds on getting into the sort of the final 8 or anything like that was very, very slim. I mean, do you think that all the changes that have happened in 9th, do you think that's shifted? And there are some armies now that are going to break into be it the team meta or the singles meta that maybe previously weren't in that conversation.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I was going to say just 2 things. I think there are 2 things for me that makes a big difference. First of all, what happens with Marines, because if they're all being consolidated into one book, suddenly if the WTC says you can only have one type of Marines in one army.
Please do that.
Suddenly, rather than having. Because before you didn't really have that many anyway, because most of the other factions weren't that good. But you did have like Blood Angel Smash Captains in one army. Maybe you'd have had Ragnar for sure in another army if we were playing, that kind of thing. You'd have had, obviously Marines as one army. You probably would have had Death Watch maybe souped in, or Grey Knights as another army. So you'd have maybe half the armies as Marine type armies. Plus, then you've got Chaos. So you've got Death Guard. Thousand Suns, so you could literally build 8 armies that were all Marines of some sort. Whereas now, if Marines get folded in, and I could also see potentially Chaos getting folded in as well in a similar way, say, that could make armies a lot more interesting, because suddenly you've only maybe got 2 choices that are Marine based, and then you've suddenly got Xenos armies are going to have to fill those gaps. And the Xenos armies right now are probably on the weakest. Well, they're probably weaker than a lot of the other Marine armies. So if they get good again, it'll be interesting to see how they influence. I think secondly, Forge World will make a big difference as well, because obviously Forge World wasn't used at WTC, but it was used a lot in the ITC outside of WTC. And I know there's discussions about will it make the transition to WTC, and I think some armies like Custodes get a lot of benefit from having Forge World, and obviously with all the rules changing, with maybe a rumored Forge World book, things like right now you can see definitely like Scorpiuses, drills, Custo, the Telemons, that kind of stuff. They're really powerful, and if they're allowed, then that makes a big difference in terms of the armies that they can use them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Custodes player, and I would obviously, if I was playing the WTC, I'd want to be able to use my Telemons. I mean, personally, I think Forge World is okay, but I know that a lot of people, they have the issue of obviously the Forged rules. Were they as well play tested and thought out as the main GW rules? Conversation is obviously that from what we understand, Forge World have been brought in, like the rules part of Forge have been brought into the main design studio, and it does fall under the auspices of the playtesters. But then there's obviously a conversation we had about this kind of like the pay to win of Forge World. I mean, remember, was it back in Sick Fed when Josh Roberts rocked up with his 12 Hornets one tournament?
Yeah.
And he just crushed. It was like a £600 army or so, £600 he dropped.
Like
he just like if you. And obviously, WTC, you have this issue of it's an expensive event, and you have sub teams from certain countries maybe not have it as easy access to buying Forge World, or just the sheer cost of it makes it prohibitive. So I think there's a discussion there. I personally would like Forge World, but I understand people's feelings against it.
It's also just more marine stuff. So my issue with Forge World has always been that outside of Custodes, it's just variants. It's almost all just variants of stuff that's in codexes, and it only ever gets used when it's more efficient than the stuff that was designed for the game. So you'll see stuff like Lehman Russ Conquerors will only ever show up. No one's going to use them because they're more fun. They're going to use them because they're better than Lehman Russ's, the unit that was designed for 40k. That's my issue with it. You'll see the Space Marine Dreadnoughts because they're better than the Dreadnoughts in the Codex. It's just what it is. If Dreadnoughts were good, you'd use Dreadnoughts. You don't need a better Dreadnought. That's my issue with it, is that it's just more efficient versions of things in the Codex, or it's completely unplayable.
Yeah, we had actually just today probably like 200 WhatsApp message, discussion in one of our 40k chats here in Finland about Forge World and the pros and cons. And for me, the big sort of con is that everybody understands who have played this game, understands how complex this is, how many rules, how many different kinds of things there are that you can do, also with the stratagems and everything. So as long as we can't even play the normal codexes and the normal core rules right, and I haven't been to that many ETCs yet, but still I've been correcting people in for example in the BTC, and somebody saying like, these things can do this, and I talked to this one national team player, and he said he's been doing this for 3 years, and I'm like, oh, but that's wrong. So my biggest issue with Forge World is that like we don't need more things we can play wrong in the game. As long as I would much rather have like a smaller rule sets, smaller amount of data sheets, because everybody understands when we're playing competitively, you'll pick the units on their performance.
But
it's really cool.
I do agree that the bloat was a big problem back in 8th, and it still is a bit of an issue. I do like some of the Forge. I mean, Forge World has got some of the best models. I know we're horrible power gamers, so we don't really care that much about models. But the models are really cool, and I mean, if GW brings them in like as kind of official, these are we are definitely playtesting them. They are being balanced versus the regular units. I mean, things like Telemons, they're such cool models. And like the Venatari and all those really like Custodes they've got more Forge units than they do regular units. So I know Custodes is a bit of a unique thing, but there are lots of units that are really cool in Forge World. So it would be a shame to say they're completely banned, but I understand like they are. The ones that are taken are very broken. Things like drills probably are ridiculously undercosted. Scorpiuses are probably still undercosted, but those things might change. So hopefully, if they become more balanced, they're like another thing you could maybe spice your arm up. Like things like a town arm. I mean, they're way too cheap right now, but it's quite fun. It makes it's a completely different town list. If you have a town,
nobody has fun when there's a town arm on the board.
It makes that army completely different, right? Like you've got a regular town army and you've got
it's a 900-point crisis suit. That's not fun.
It's a mini Titan, is what it is.
Right now, if you have 2 of them, that's a very unique tower army. Like you're playing a very different game than if you're playing a regular tower army. So I don't know.
I am considering you can have the best drinking WTC ever if you just bring one Warhound Titan. But if you can convince your team to let you bring a Warhound Titan, you've just got 6 days. You've just got 5 days in whatever country you're in to drink.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about playing. You've got like 15 minutes a day of playing.
To be fair, I think there is actually a guy. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 LVOs in a row. There's a guy that goes a couple of years in a row, owning for all the Titan each year.
We had a guy bring it to our team event last year, and he lost it to a last pistol in one game.
But so obviously, moving the Forge debate is something that's going to get hashed out. So between now and December, if the captains, a decision we made one way or another. Maybe it'll be Forge all in. Maybe it'll be, like you say, selective Forge or Custodes and certain other things. But we sort of talk about what's going to maybe break in. I mean, obviously, all these changes. Do you think there are armies that are being really hard done by ninth, and aren't going to be in the conversation anymore? I mean, I can give you an example. A lot of people talk about how knights, they were the gatekeeper list previously. You always had to have an answer to a knight army if you in your army list. If you face knights, can you deal with them or can you win the game by working around them? Do you think even straight off? Do you think knights are as hard done as everyone's talking about, or do you think maybe there's other armies that basically they've obviously dropped down the sort of rankings? Vili?
Yeah, I can start. I played probably like 10 games of Knight. Sort of then going back to the discussion about the secondaries and everything, you can actually have a list where you have a Castle and a nine armigers, and that probably would be the list for me to play with the Knights if I would go to an event. But at the same time, it's all about still like the game mechanic. Saying like, okay, probably the Death Guard are the new Imperial Guards in a way, because they have such a huge amount of like high toughness, invulnerable, disgustingly resilient stuff, pun intended. So in that way, I think there will always be a list which is sort of the gatekeeper, but at the same time, coming back, we're at the start of the 9th. It has literally just come out. We're going to probably see some point the meta will change completely when the Marines get the new codex, especially if we consolidate all of the Marine codexes for the team tournament and all of that. So I wouldn't yet start to define what we will see or which we will see in every country's lists in the WTC. I'm really looking forward sort of how this game evolves, how the meta evolves in the following months.
Yeah, I think the two biggest changes I would definitely see is, I mean, even pre 9th, I think you maybe would have seen Custodes, because Water Spider made a massive difference, that book. But it would have been the lack of CP and all that made them very difficult to play. Whereas now they are a genuine contender, which if you'd have told me that a year ago, last WTC, that Custodes would be on the team, I'd have said you're crazy, because there's no way, looking back from last year to now, would Custodes were a million miles away from being, apart from the Shield Captains, everything else was never going to be played, because the objective game wasn't that important, really. It was about killing stuff or controlling the board, and Custodes just didn't have the CP to survive. I have found, though, that I think Tau have been hit some of the hardest changes. I feel like they were really strong last year, and they were really strong in 8th. Right at the end of 8th, they were very strong with shield drones and riptides, and they have been hit very hard. I don't know if they would make a team right now. Personally, I don't think I would be picking them on a team of 8. I think there are probably 8 better armies at playing the missions than them, and for me, that's a really big change, because Tau have been good for a long time. Like for all of 8th, they were pretty good. So for me, it's a strange to find Tau in such a weak state at the start of 9th, and they basically just need a new book.
Tau definitely got hit a lot with 15-point shield drones.
Yeah, they just need a new book, because their models are their units rely on fly. They've only really got shooting. They don't really have any combat. They don't have massive amounts of mobility apart from
the crisis bomb list that was floating around at the end of 8th lost a lot with being able to get tagged and not being able to fire into combat because they're not vehicles, and then not being able to fall back and shoot. That was probably the most interesting list that came out of Tau for the latter half of 8th edition, and it got completely gutted. So yeah, Tau definitely took a big hit.
Yeah, and a lot of units that were not that good. They were okay, like things like breaches, even like crisis suits. They were never overpowered. They went up a lot of points as a percentage. Like a fire went up 2 points, which compared to a guardsman went up 1 point. It's hard to probably a guardsman right now is better than a breacher, and it's nearly half the cost because the ability it can move so much faster to get onto these objectives. So Tau, I find, are in a really difficult spot. There probably are Tau players who are doing really well with them, and I'm really interested to see how people play them. But you have to completely rip up the old armies because they don't work anymore. And and things like, I know other armies will have this probably in their books, but things like commanders being limited. So if you want your 3 commanders, you've got to take 3 detachments. That's suddenly a lot of CP lost. If you want to have 6, okay, you can have 6 with Farsight, but then your Overwatch is really not good, and that's really one of the main benefits of Tau now is they've got that good Overwatch still. So there's very difficult balances to make there. And I'm interested to see how they get on. But I'm also really interested in see how Custodes get played, because I think they're a really fun army that wasn't explored at all in 8th, apart from Shield Captains. But now you're going to see them everywhere because they are quite easy to collect because there's not many models, and their rules are really fun. They're really they've got so much so many different ways of playing them, all the different hosts. You've got if you've got Forge World, you've got all those different units you can use, and I think everything's pretty well priced. You've got great stratagems, and also because they're not they don't have those that kind of doctrine mechanic, you can soup in other armies in with them to you can have guard or sisters, whatever, to kind of allay some of their weaknesses. And I think they're really interesting, and it will be fascinating to see how they progress, because right now they're really strong, but will they be able to keep that kind of strength during 9th, or will other armies kind of catch up with them? Or that'll be quite interesting for me.
Yeah, cool. For me, the 2 loser armies that I've picked, that I feel like I've seen in 9th so far, are Chaos Knights, because they lost all of their pre-game flexibility. Now with things like you got to lock your pacts and your damnation on your list, or you got to roll for them randomly. All of their options just got completely cut out from under them, and they're now very restricted. They don't have that flexibility they had before. They're also their Knight Castle is 70 points more expensive than an Imperial one. Let's hope that goes away, or the Imperial one goes up. But yeah, they lost a lot of flexibility, and I think it really hamstrung them as an army, because that was their big selling point, was how flexible you could be with pacts, damnations, the vows that you could take for the iconoclast stuff. And the other army is the army that basically was defined by 8th edition's mechanics, which was Genestealer Cult. Absolutely got hammered by all the changes. There's stuff like wrapping, shock assault for Space Marines, everything that changed for 9th edition just basically ripped the heart out of the Genestealer Cult army. Losing Vigilance detachments probably hurt them more than it hurt any other faction. They've still got builds and things like the Ridge Runner build, or you could do Acolytes and trucks and things like that, but they're not really a Genestealer Cult army in that same way. They feel more like Guard in a funny hat. The actual the Genestealer Cult armies that you saw, whether it was Aberrants, Acolytes, all this stuff charging from reserve, that archetype that was their list, that was their book functionally, what it was built around, just doesn't work anymore. And I think that's really disappointing, because it was such a cool thematic army that now it doesn't exist in the same form, and it kind of can't now, because it's too expensive, it's too fragile, and the game mechanics just don't reward it anymore. And I think that's disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, 3 of the best players in Sweden were all GSC players last edition, or at least the last edition, and they've all moved to something else. As far as they're all concerned, the Codex is gutted. You can play, like you say, you can play the Ridge Runner army. It's fun, but it's, if you want to be sort of competing at the sharp end of the stick, it's not going to do it for you, really.
Yeah, it's just a guard army with access to Vect. If that does it for you, that's fine. But that's not why people picked up GSC, is it? You picked up GSC because you wanted to beat people over the head with a stop sign, and that was funny.
It's funny how,
absolutely. I mean, that was was it Tabletop Tactics, their video, and they did the Codex review, so every Codex into 9th, and their review of GSC was basically what's good, and they named guard units.
Yeah. It's funny how the GSC was so good in 8th and Tyranids were just kind of average, whereas now Tyranids have got so many more benefits from 9th edition, and GSC got absolutely hammered. Like before, you wouldn't really see that many Tyranid units apart from Gin Stealers and Swarmlord, because that's what everybody used to play, whereas now Nids have got so many more fun options to play with, and GSC, like you said, they're so poor. There's really very, very little reason to play pure GSC anyway. You just
if I didn't need my kidneys, I'd have bought 9 Pyrovores because they're so good with generic outflank.
Yeah, it's great. I agree. The Chaos Knights, they did rely on that flexibility. I think it's really difficult. But like Imperial Knights, they don't need that as much flexibility. They've got really good relics. They're probably always going to take, same with the Warlord traits, you're always going to take those same few Warlord traits every game. So you can build your army around those, whereas Chaos Knights don't. A lot of Warlord traits or relics you'll take won't be useful in that game, and you've lost a lot of CP if you don't do that. And if you don't take them and you play that army where it's really useful, then you've lost a lot of you might as well play Imperial Knights, right? There's no benefit to being Chaos Knights at that point.
Yeah, you lose oh no, I took Ion Bulwark and they don't have a bunch of las cannons. What a shame, I'm only a 4-up invulnerable save instead of a 2-up armor save. It's not that big a deal. Knights, you go from, I have always fights first, to I can cast powers as a knight, and they're just so completely different that you can't pick a middle ground really with Chaos Knights, whereas Imperial Knights, it's much easier to find that middle ground. So until Chaos Knights get an update that maybe allows them to do those things during deployment instead of before the game, which I think would be very beneficial to them, they're just kind of stuck in limbo.
Yeah.
Definitely
as an archetype, I think the flyer armies are gone. I mean, like last year, again, Eldar flyer armies were really, really good. Tony Chu, dominated 8th all edition with either Storm Ravens, with Eldar flyers, Dark Eldar flyers, and I think flyers now are where they should be. They're just little support pieces. You can almost say they're probably not underpowered, but a lot of them are very.
They're like air support.
Yeah, and they're definitely much more useful. They're much more balanced, because before they were just so broken. You'll never see an army now with 6 flyers. I don't think, unless they
maybe like Dark Eldar could get away with it because they can run triple patrol, but Dark Eldar flyers just aren't that good that it's worth running 6. So it's fine. Like I'm not worried about them. I'm okay if Dark Eldar want us to run 6 flyers because at least that's cool, and they're running like triple Cabal detachments or something like that.
I'd also say even if you could run multiple flyers, because you're not stacking all these negatives to hit anymore, they are much easier to deal with in 9th. I mean, I played against my mate of his AdMech of his flyers, and it's -1 to hit is -1 to hit. You pretty much nowadays when you build an army, you're almost expecting to have -1 to hit with everything you shoot with.
The other issue for flyers is the board size changes. It's because a lot of the time with flyers you were range sniping people. Like you would hover at 36-inch range, fire a bunch of high quality shots, and be out of range of counter punch. And the little counter punch that was, you were -1, -2, -7 to hit. Now you're so much closer to people that you want to try and range snipe. You're not in range of anything, or you're in range of everything of theirs. You don't have that maneuverability. Yeah, you can zip around just as much. People can't get away from you, but they couldn't anyway. So you've just lost space. They've not lost anything in comparison. A Crimson Hunter can't fly 60 inches away from you, shoot the one thing in the corner, and then be all right. What are you going to do about it? Now you're still stood next to their army at that point.
Yeah. So guys, I pretty much covered everything we want to cover for today. Have you guys got any final thoughts or comments before we wrap it all up?
I'm just sad we're not playing right now. I'd love.
I know.
So it would have been so much fun to have actually tried 9th out as a proper team event, and I'm looking forward to hopefully one day, if we're lucky enough that this all goes away, that we can all play again and enjoy that crazy diversity, because I think it's a very unique event. WTC, it's definitely for me it's the best event. Probably the only reason I play 40k. If I wasn't playing WTC, I probably wouldn't be playing as much as I do, because it's such a good event. So I really do hope we can get it back one day.
It just means that this next one's going to be bigger.
Be a reference. Sorry, Innes. Sorry.
It just means that we're building to the next one. We've had 2 years of prep for this one. We're going to be even more excited when we get there. Yeah, I can't wait. It's been gutting this year, not having Six Nations and not having WTC. Like you build your year, you really do. You build your year around it if you're trying to play for it every year. I've been 3 years in a row. This is the first year I've not been since I started playing competitively. Really, it's honestly just like the most disappointing thing to not be there, because the world is in the state it is.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, of course, agreeing with the guys. It of course, I would much rather be there. But yeah, you do what you can, what has been given. My sort of final thoughts is like for everyone who's maybe doubting ninth or sort of still on the verge of like, is it better or so? Play 10 games. They're fast, they're fun, they're brutal, and sort of there's so many different things to test out list wise and with the new terrains and everything. So keep on playing, and the disclaimer, of course, is that I'm actually an investor on Games Workshop. So
Wow.
Yeah,
And if you don't like it, it's still better than 6th. So you got through that.
I think
and it's
7th
definitely
was
better than
worse.
7th.
Oh, you take that back. Invisibility was beautiful.
7th.
I have it framed on my wall.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've just agree, guys. I mean, like, yeah, it sucks that we're not in Austria playing the WTC right now. You know, it hit me at the start of this week, and it's so gutting.
We should all be drinking in Austria right now. It's 9:20 in Austria. Round 2's over. Scotland are first. It's great.
Yeah.
A man can dream, right?
I was so looking forward to the
All right,
Russian
guys.
versus England rematch. They would have wanted their revenge, I'm sure, after last year.
Definitely. All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having us.
We'll definitely have you on again in the future. You know, the idea is we'll be doing this sort of every couple of weeks, looking at different teams, looking at in the meta shifts and stuff. So thanks for your input, and thank you to everyone who's listened. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, and one final thing, I must say big thanks to Tom, Isik, and Neil. You're doing an excellent job, and even sort of the event got cancelled. Yeah, you have done amazing job for the years and hopefully for years to come. So our grandchildren will be able to enjoy WTC hosted by Neil, Isik, and Tom. So thanks guys. Because not everybody understands how big of a amount of work you put in for the event. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. That's all for this week. Thank you once again for listening. If you'd like to leave us a like on YouTube or a positive review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, that would be amazing. Otherwise, take care, stay safe, and always play with intent.